Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Our tale begins in a small, quiet town in Texas. The skies were gray, and the streets slick with rain, the perfect setting for a moment of fate. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, walked down the sidewalk, weighed down by the pressure of his final year at school. His backpack, filled with textbooks, hung heavily on his shoulder. He had so much on his mind: final exams, his part-time job, and a mountain of debt left by his late father. Money was tight, and there never seemed to be enough hours in the day. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him from his thoughts. Mark answered the call with a calm, but tired voice. Mark Davis speaking. On the other end, a composed and authoritative voice responded, Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation. Mark frowned, confusion crossing his face. I'm sorry, who are you? How do you know about me? The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. I know enough, she replied smoothly. Let's meet at Brooks Bistro at 7:00 p.m. It's important. Before he could ask more questions, the line went dead. He stood there for a moment, the rain beginning to fall harder, his mind racing. Who was this Eleanor Brooks? How did she know about his financial troubles? Mark had never heard of her, but the name carried a sense of authority. With no other option, he decided to go. The rain soaked through his jacket as he made his way to the bistro. By the time Mark arrived at Brooks Bistro, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted him as he entered the cozy cafe. He shook off his umbrella and stepped inside. At a corner table, a striking woman with silver hair, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, sat waiting. She looked every bit the image of wealth, her presence commanding yet calm. Mark, she greeted him as he approached. Please, have a seat. Her voice was smooth, and there was a sharpness to her gaze that immediately made him feel as though she could see through him. Mrs. Brooks, Mark said, still unsure of what was going on. What's this about? Eleanor didn't waste time. I know about your debts, Mark. The ones left behind by your father. I know you're struggling to make ends meet. I'm here to offer you a solution. Mark sat down, still confused. And what kind of solution could you possibly offer me? She leaned in slightly, her expression serious. I propose we get married. It's not about love, it's a business arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts, ensure your financial security, and in return, you'll be my husband. I need someone to share my name, my estate, and nothing more. Mark stared at her in disbelief. You're serious? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Why me? You don't even know me. Eleanor's eyes softened for a brief moment. Exactly. You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. You won't have to worry about money again. Think of it as a contract. A simple, clean transaction. Mark felt his mind racing. This was insane. Marry a woman he didn't know, all for money? But with his mother's medical bills mounting, and his own student loans threatening to drown him, he was running out of options. He looked down at his hands, unsure what to say. Eleanor's offer was tempting, too tempting. I need time to think about it, he said finally. She smiled faintly. Of course. But don't take too long. This offer doesn't stand forever. Mark left the bistro that evening with a heavy heart, the weight of his choices pressing on him. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was clear: his life was about to change forever. Mark stood outside the bistro, the rain still falling steadily around him, and his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, "I'll pay off all your debts, ensure your financial security, and in return, you'll be my husband." He had no idea what he had just agreed to. Marrying a stranger? A woman he had just met? It felt surreal, but the weight of his financial burden was something he couldn't ignore. His mother's medical bills, his own student loans, and the mounting pressure of his life. He couldn't keep going this way. But was this the answer? Was he willing to trade his dignity for the chance to solve all his problems? He felt the cool rain on his face, but it did nothing to calm the storm in his chest. After a long moment, he made his decision. He would go through with it. The following evening, Mark found himself standing at the entrance of a grand estate, the towering gates looming in front of him like the start of a new life. The mansion was stunning, far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The driveway stretched out before him, flanked by perfectly manicured hedges. He had seen pictures of luxurious homes, but nothing could have prepared him for the scale of this place. Eleanor's world was one of elegance, power, and money. And now, he was about to enter it. As he stood there, a sense of unease washed over him. This was real. He was about to marry a woman he barely knew. And in return, his debts would be erased, and he would be given a life that many would envy. But would it be enough? Was he truly ready to give up everything for security? He couldn't shake the thought that something was off. When he rang the doorbell, a butler answered immediately. "Mr. Davis," he said with a polite smile. "Miss Brooks is expecting you. Please follow me." Mark walked into the grand foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The house felt cold, not in temperature, but in its emptiness. The walls were adorned with paintings from long-gone eras, and the light from crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over everything. Yet, despite all the luxury, it felt sterile, like a place where no one truly lived. He was led to a sitting room where Eleanor was waiting, dressed in a sleek black dress that accentuated her sharp features. She looked up from her phone as he entered, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Mark, I'm glad you could make it," Eleanor said, gesturing for him to sit. "I know this is a lot to take in, but it's the only way." Her tone was calm, measured, but there was an undeniable air of authority in her voice. Mark sat down, feeling out of place in this unfamiliar world. "I've had the paperwork prepared," she continued. "Once we sign, your debts will be taken care of, and you'll be part of this family, in name at least. It's simple, and it's what we both need." He nodded, still unsure. He hadn't expected everything to happen so quickly, but here he was, on the verge of making a decision that would change his life forever. He glanced at the papers on the table, the weight of what he was about to sign heavy in the air. "What happens after we sign?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. Eleanor met his gaze with a look that seemed almost too practiced, too perfect. "We move forward with the contract," she said. "You'll live here with me. You'll attend events, help me with my foundation, and keep up the appearance of a married couple. But there's no expectation of love. This isn't about love, Mark. It's about partnership, security, and stability." She paused for a moment before continuing, her voice softening. "I need you, and you need me. It's as simple as that." He stared at the papers again, the legal language blurring before his eyes. Was this really happening? Was he really about to marry a woman he didn't love, for the sake of security? Mark signed the papers with trembling hands, a sense of finality settling over him. He could feel the weight of his decision, the uncertainty of his future hanging in the air. Eleanor watched him, her eyes calculating, yet somehow distant. She handed him a pen and signed the documents as well. "It's done," she said, her voice carrying a sense of authority that left no room for doubt. Mark didn't know what to say. He had just signed away a part of his soul, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the best decision of his life. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Mark moved into the mansion, where Eleanor provided him with everything he could ever need: luxury cars, expensive clothes, and a lifestyle that many would dream of. But it didn't feel right. He felt like an outsider in his own life. They attended galas and charity events, posing as the perfect couple, smiling for the cameras, playing their parts. Yet, every night when the events ended and the house fell silent, he was left alone with his thoughts. Eleanor kept her distance, never offering more than what was necessary. She was always professional, always poised, but there was something cold about her. Something that kept him from truly connecting with her. One evening, after a particularly lavish gala, Mark stood in the empty ballroom, looking out over the city through the floor-to-ceiling window. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but all he could see was the emptiness inside. He had everything he thought he wanted: money, security, a life without worry. But it felt hollow. He missed the life he used to have, even if it was difficult. He missed the feeling of being real, of being himself. In that moment, Mark realized that no amount of money or security could replace the need for true connection. He turned away from the window and walked toward the stairs. He was done pretending. He needed something more than this. He needed to feel alive again. Mark walked through the grand halls of the mansion, his footsteps echoing in the silence that had become all too familiar. The lavish decor, the expensive furniture, and the endless luxury surrounded him, yet none of it felt real. It had been weeks since he signed the contract, weeks since he agreed to this arrangement with Eleanor, and still, nothing felt like it was meant to be. His life had been turned upside down, but not in the way he had hoped. He had everything he could ever need, yet there was something missing: a connection, a purpose, a reason to feel alive. As he walked through the hallway, his eyes landed on a family portrait that hung on the wall, the image of Eleanor with her late husband and their 2 children. The coldness of it struck him, and for the first time, he wondered what had happened to the family who once called this place home. He stepped into the study, where Eleanor was sitting behind her desk, reviewing papers. She looked up as he entered, her face expressionless as usual. "Mark," she said, her tone businesslike, "I need you to attend a charity event tomorrow night. It's important for the foundation." Her words were always clipped, always precise, never showing a hint of warmth. He nodded, but the truth was, he had grown weary of these events, of pretending to be someone he wasn't. The facade was getting harder to maintain with each passing day. "Eleanor," Mark began, his voice hesitant, "can we talk for a moment?" She raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything, motioning for him to sit across from her. Mark sat down, unsure how to phrase the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. He had always been someone who avoided confrontation, but the weight of his emotions was becoming unbearable. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about this arrangement, about us." Eleanor didn't react immediately. She simply stared at him, her gaze unwavering. "What about it?" she asked, her voice cold, but not unkind. Mark struggled to find the right words. "I didn't expect things to be like this. I thought I could handle it. But I feel like we're just going through the motions. I'm not sure I can keep doing this." She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Mark, this was never supposed to be about emotions. It's a business deal, nothing more." Her words cut through him, but he couldn't help feeling that there was more to her than she was letting on. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with this. We're living in the same house, but we're strangers. I thought maybe, over time, things would change. But they haven't. And I don't know if they ever will." There was a long pause. Eleanor sat silently, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Mark felt a strange sense of vulnerability in the silence, as if she was trying to figure out how much of herself she was willing to share. "You're right," she finally said, her voice softening for the first time. "We're strangers. But that doesn't mean we can't coexist. We have a deal, Mark. That's what matters." Her words stung, but there was something in her tone that made him pause. It was as if, for the first time, she was acknowledging his feelings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Mark let out a deep breath, his mind still racing. He wanted to believe that things could change, that they could somehow find a way to make this work. But he wasn't sure if he was the only one trying. "I just don't want to feel invisible," he admitted softly. Eleanor looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, she stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the sprawling estate. The moonlight bathed the garden below, casting long shadows across the lawn. "You're not invisible, Mark," she said quietly. "But you have to understand, I'm not here to give you a fairy tale. This is what I can offer, and if you can accept that, we can move forward." Mark stood up, walking slowly toward her. He hadn't expected this conversation to go anywhere, but a small part of him had hoped that maybe, just maybe, Eleanor would let her guard down. "I'm not asking for a fairy tale," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just asking for something real." She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity he hadn't seen before. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps something more, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I can't give you that, Mark," she said, her voice firm once again. "But if you want to keep playing this game, I suggest you find a way to make peace with it." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He didn't know what he expected from her, but he realized that he wasn't going to find it. He wasn't going to find love, at least not here. Not in this cold, sterile house filled with luxuries but void of warmth. But he had made his choice. He had signed the papers. And he would follow through. Mark left the study that night, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. He had entered this arrangement for financial security, but now, he wasn't sure what he was getting out of it. The price of stability had cost him more than he had anticipated. He didn't know where this was heading, but deep down, he knew that the real challenge was not surviving the marriage, it was surviving the emotional emptiness that came with it. Mark sat in the large, empty living room, the silence around him only broken by the faint ticking of a wall clock. The house, despite its grandeur, felt more like a prison every day. He had been living this double life for weeks now, playing the role of a husband in a marriage that wasn't real. Every evening, they would attend events together, acting like the perfect couple for the cameras. But when the doors of the mansion closed behind them, they were once again two strangers living under the same roof. Eleanor had remained distant, always keeping things strictly business. They never spoke about their feelings, never discussed the reason they had entered this arrangement in the first place. It was a simple, cold contract. But Mark could no longer ignore the growing tension between them. He needed something more than this emptiness. It was one of those rare quiet nights when Eleanor had gone to bed early, leaving Mark to his thoughts. He walked to the window and stared out at the city lights below, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. He had entered this arrangement with the hope that it would be temporary, that at some point, they would connect, that he would feel like he was truly a part of something. But nothing had changed. It was the same cold silence every day. He had tried to ignore the feelings stirring inside him, but the longer he stayed in this house, the more unbearable it became. He wanted to feel like he mattered. He wanted to feel like he was more than just someone filling a space in Eleanor's life. The next morning, as Mark was getting ready to leave for another charity gala that Eleanor had insisted they attend, he felt a sudden sense of restlessness. He had never been the type to shy away from challenges, but this felt different. He had been pretending for far too long, and he couldn't do it anymore. He wasn't sure what he expected from Eleanor, but he knew that if things were going to change, he needed to take control of his own life. He wasn't just going to be a passive player in this game anymore. He stepped out of the car when they arrived at the gala, his heart pounding in his chest. The event was the same as all the others: luxury, glitz, and fake smiles. But this time, Mark wasn't just going to stand by and let the night pass him by. He walked alongside Eleanor, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't there just to be her husband for show, he was there to figure out what he wanted. As they entered the ballroom, the usual crowd of high society greeted them with their polite smiles. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on his arm as they made their way through the crowd, but Mark felt the distance between them, a distance that no one could see but him. As the night wore on, Mark found himself alone in a quiet corner of the venue, away from the noise and the glimmering lights. He needed a moment to clear his head. His thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation he had with Eleanor a few days ago. She had made it clear that this was not about love, that it was a business arrangement, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she let on. He didn't know if it was her walls he wanted to break down or the loneliness he saw reflected in her eyes. For the first time, he found himself wondering if they were more alike than he thought. They were both trapped in their own worlds, both hiding from the things they truly needed. Just as Mark was about to turn back to the party, he heard a voice behind him. "Mark." He turned to see Eleanor standing there, her eyes scanning the room. For the first time, her expression wasn't just businesslike. There was something softer in her gaze, something almost vulnerable. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, her tone gentler than usual. Mark hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I'm just thinking," he said, "about everything." He paused, unsure if he should say more. Eleanor stood there for a moment, looking at him as if waiting for him to continue. But Mark wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. He wasn't sure if he ever would be. Instead, he took a step closer to her. "I'm tired, Eleanor," he said quietly. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I want more than this." Eleanor didn't say anything for a long moment. Her eyes flickered with something surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Finally, she spoke. "I know you do," she said softly. "But this is how it has to be. We've made our choices." Mark felt his chest tighten at her words. They had made their choices, yes, but was this really all there was? A life of luxury, but no warmth? No connection? Was that all Eleanor had to offer him? Mark realized then that he couldn't live this way anymore. He had signed the papers, yes, but that didn't mean he had to lose himself in the process. He couldn't keep pretending. Not for her, and not for himself. He took a deep breath and met her gaze. "I need to make a decision," he said quietly. Eleanor didn't respond right away. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Mark wondered if she had any idea what it felt like to be in his shoes, to be trapped in a life that wasn't his own. He turned to leave, but before he did, Eleanor called out to him. "Mark," she said, her voice filled with something unexpected. "You're not alone in this. You never were." Mark paused, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what she meant, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something had shifted between them. He walked away from her that night with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: was no longer willing to live in the shadows. He was ready to find out who he truly was, and whether or not that meant he would stay in this marriage or walk away. The following days passed in a blur for Mark. He had returned to the mansion after the gala, his mind racing with all the emotions he had kept buried for so long. Eleanor's words still echoed in his head: "You're not alone in this. You never were." But what did that mean? Was she offering him more than just a cold contract? Was there a chance for something real between them, or had he simply misread her? Mark couldn't help but feel conflicted. He had entered this marriage for financial security, but now, he was beginning to wonder if there was more to it, if there could be more to it. It was another quiet evening when Mark decided he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to confront Eleanor, needed to have a real conversation about what was happening between them, and what they both truly wanted. He had lived in her world of luxury and expectations long enough. He couldn't keep pretending that he was content just playing his part. He walked through the mansion's corridors, the familiar silence settling around him, only to find Eleanor in her office, working as usual. She was bent over a stack of papers, completely absorbed in her work. Mark hesitated for a moment before knocking lightly on the doorframe. Eleanor looked up, her eyes cold and guarded. "Mark," she said, her voice neutral, "what is it?" He took a deep breath and stepped inside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About us. About this arrangement." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't easy, but it was something he had to do. Eleanor, I'm not asking for a fairy tale, he continued. I'm not asking for love, but I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. He paused, trying to find the right words. This doesn't feel real anymore. We're living in the same house, but we're still strangers. And I don't know if I can keep doing this. I need more. I need something real, something that matters. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor didn't immediately respond. She simply stared at him, her face a mix of curiosity and caution. After a long pause, she stood up from her desk, walked over to the window, and stared out at the night sky. The city lights twinkled below, but the silence in the room was deafening. I've always been clear about what this is, Mark, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. This marriage, this arrangement, it's not about feelings. It was never meant to be. She turned to face him, her expression now more open, more vulnerable. But I understand now, she continued, her gaze softening, that maybe it's been unfair to you. I've been living my life, my way, and I never considered how this would affect you. I've been so focused on what I needed, I didn't think about what you might need. Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. For the first time, Eleanor seemed human, not just the cold, calculating businesswoman who had offered him a deal he couldn't refuse. She seemed like someone who was finally starting to see him not just as her husband on paper, but as a person. I've spent so much time trying to protect myself, she said, her voice quieter now, that I forgot what it was like to trust someone. To let someone in. But I'm not sure how to fix it. I don't know how to give you what you need. Mark stepped closer to her, his heart pounding. Eleanor, he said, his voice tender, I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to be real with each other. A chance to find out who we are, beyond this contract. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, slowly, she nodded. I don't know what this will look like, she said quietly. I don't know if I can give you what you want, but I'm willing to try. I owe you that much. Mark felt a flicker of hope ignite inside him, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. This wasn't some fairy tale ending. They had a long way to go before they could figure out what this marriage really meant. But in that moment, he felt something shift between them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The rest of the evening passed in silence as they both retreated to their respective spaces, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. The air between them was still thick with unspoken words, but for the first time in months, he felt like they were both looking in the same direction. They weren't just going through the motions anymore. They were facing the truth of their situation, and though neither of them knew exactly where it would lead, they were both ready to see where it could go. Mark lay in bed that night, his mind racing with the possibilities. For the first time since this all began, he felt like he had a choice in the matter. He wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. He was a person with his own wants and needs, and Eleanor strangely enough was starting to see that. He didn't know what the future held, but he was willing to find out. The days that followed were a delicate balance of silence and small moments of breakthrough. Eleanor and Mark continued to live under the same roof, but something had shifted. There was no grand confession or sudden change. It was the small, quiet gestures that began to make the difference. Mark noticed that Eleanor was more open with him, more willing to share pieces of her life beyond the cold businesswoman he had first encountered. She began to open up about her past, about her fears, about why she had built these walls around herself. He found himself listening, truly listening, in a way he hadn't before. And with every conversation, the distance between them seemed to shrink, just a little bit more. One evening, after a long day, Mark found himself walking into the living room to find Eleanor sitting by the fire, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her eyes softening when she saw him. There was no pretense, no formality in her gaze. She was just Eleanor. The woman who had invited him into her life, and whom he had slowly started to care for. Mark, she said, her voice quiet but warm, come sit with me. I want to talk. He hesitated for a moment, but something in her voice told him this was different. This wasn't another business conversation, or another cold exchange. This was something real. He walked over to her and sat down, feeling the heat of the fire on his face. She handed him a glass of wine, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat in the comfortable silence that had slowly begun to replace the tension in the house. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice soft, "about what you said the other night. About wanting something real." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I don't know if I can give you all the answers, Mark, but I'm willing to try. I've spent so many years building this life for myself, thinking that security and control were enough. But now I see that there's more to life than just that. There's more to us than just a contract. And maybe, just maybe, I've been afraid to let go of that control." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face for something. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. Was she really saying this? "You don't have to have all the answers," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We're both figuring this out. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for a chance." He reached for her hand, and she let him, their fingers intertwining in a quiet gesture of connection. For the first time since this whole arrangement began, it felt like they were truly in it together. She gave a small, hesitant smile. "I never thought I would be in this position," she said softly. "I thought I could do it all on my own, that I didn't need anyone. But now I realize that maybe I do. Maybe we both do." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and tentative, but also full of promise. For the first time, Mark saw something in her eyes: vulnerability, openness, and a willingness to take a chance on them. The next few weeks were filled with small steps forward. Eleanor began to show more of herself, not just the stoic, guarded woman she had been, but the woman behind the walls, someone who had been hurt, who had suffered, but who was also capable of love. Mark continued to be patient, understanding that change wouldn't happen overnight. But every day, he saw her letting go of the control she had held so tightly to for so long. And in return, he found himself opening up more too. He had come into this arrangement expecting nothing more than a business deal, but now, he was beginning to realize that this was something far deeper. They weren't just living together out of necessity. They were becoming a team, slowly but surely. One night, as they sat in the kitchen, sharing a quiet meal together, Eleanor turned to Mark with a soft smile. "I know we still have a long way to go," she said, "but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying." Mark looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and hope. "I can see that," he said. "And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They shared a quiet moment, just the two of them, and for the first time, it didn't feel like they were just two people in a contract. It felt like they were two people in a relationship, starting to build something real. Mark knew that they still had a long road ahead of them. Their marriage, their life together, wasn't going to be perfect. There would be challenges, and there would be moments of doubt. But as he sat there with Eleanor, watching the soft glow of the kitchen light dance on her face, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. This was real. And that, in itself, was enough to give him hope for the future. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate their unusual arrangement, each of them taking small steps towards something more meaningful. There were moments of quiet understanding, fleeting touches of affection, but also times when the weight of their situation reminded them of the distance that still lay between them. Eleanor had been trying, that much was clear, but Mark could sense she was still holding something back. She was learning to open up, but the walls she had built over the years were not easily torn down. They spent more time together, talking and sharing their thoughts, but there were still many unspoken truths lingering in the air. One evening, after a long day at a charity event, Mark found himself standing in the hallway, staring at the door to Eleanor's office. The mansion was quiet, but there was a palpable tension in the air. He had spent the evening pretending just like all the other nights. Pretending that everything was fine, that he was okay with this life. But something had shifted inside him. He wasn't content just playing the role anymore. He wanted more. He needed more. He knocked lightly on her door, and Eleanor's voice came from the other side. Come in. Mark entered, finding her sitting behind her desk, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up at him, her gaze curious but guarded. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence between them thick with anticipation. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice steady but filled with the emotions he had been holding in. Eleanor, we need to talk, he said, his heart pounding. She set the papers aside and motioned for him to sit, her expression softening. About what? She asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Mark took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. About everything, he replied. About this marriage, this arrangement, about what we really want. Eleanor's eyes flickered, and for the first time, she didn't immediately shield herself with the walls she had carefully constructed. She looked at him, truly looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Mark, she said, her voice quieter now, I've been so focused on keeping control of everything, on building this life, that I've lost sight of what I really want. I've kept you at a distance because I didn't want to feel vulnerable. But I see now that it's not just about me anymore. It's about us. And I don't know what to do with that. She paused, as if searching for the right words. I'm scared, Mark. I'm scared to let go, scared of what it would mean to let someone in. I've built my life around security, around control, and I don't know how to change that. She looked down for a moment, then back up at him, her eyes vulnerable, open. Mark felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of sympathy and understanding. He had been there too, trapped in his own fears, his own doubts. I get it, he said softly. I've been scared too. Scared of failing, scared of making the wrong choice. But I don't want to keep living in fear. I want to try. I want to take a chance on us. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. For a moment, there was no pretense, no role to play. There was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something unknown. I don't know if I can give you everything you want, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can give you a chance. I'm willing to try, Mark. I'm willing to let go of some of my control, to let you in. Her words were hesitant, but there was a sincerity in them that made Mark's heart swell. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It was more than he had expected. He squeezed her hand, his voice filled with hope. That's all I want, Eleanor. A chance. For the first time in months, Mark felt like they were both finally on the same page. They weren't just living in a house together, fulfilling a contract. They were two people, imperfect but willing to take a step forward, to try something real. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time, Mark believed that they could face them together. The silence in the room stretched on, but this time, it wasn't heavy with doubt. It was filled with the quiet promise of a new beginning. Eleanor leaned in, her forehead resting gently against his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Mark knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but as he stood there with her, he felt something shift inside him. This was real. And for the first time, he believed that they could make it work. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, Mark and Eleanor began to rebuild their connection. The changes in their relationship were subtle at first, small gestures, brief moments of understanding, but they were there, quietly building the foundation of something new. Eleanor had started to let go of the walls she had spent so many years constructing, and Mark found himself opening up as well. They spent more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a shared desire to understand each other better. Their conversations became more meaningful, less about business and more about life, dreams, and fears. They no longer felt like strangers merely living under the same roof. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and events, Eleanor and Mark found themselves sitting on the balcony of their mansion, overlooking the city's skyline. The air was cool, and the lights of the city sparkled like stars beneath them. Eleanor sat next to Mark, her gaze fixed on the view, but her body was turned toward him, her presence softer than it had ever been. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke, her voice calm but filled with something deeper. "Mark," she began, her eyes still on the horizon, "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About taking a chance on us." She paused, her voice faltering slightly. "I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go of everything I've built this life, this control. But the more I've thought about it, the more I realize that I don't want to spend my life alone. I don't want to keep pretending that I don't need anyone." She turned her head to look at him then, her expression vulnerable. "I've spent so long trying to protect myself that I forgot what it feels like to truly connect with someone. And for the first time, I'm starting to see that with you." Her voice was steady now, but Mark could hear the sincerity in it. Mark felt a warmth spread through him as he listened to her words. It wasn't an easy thing for Eleanor to admit, and he knew it. She had been so guarded for so long, unwilling to let anyone in. But now, he could see the change in her. He reached out, taking her hand in his, a simple gesture, but one that meant more than words could express. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I don't expect you to have all the answers. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you. And I'm willing to take this journey with you, whatever it may bring." He paused, his voice filled with emotion. "We're both learning, we're both growing. And I believe in us." He could feel her grip tighten on his hand, and in that moment, Mark realized just how far they had come. The quiet comfort between them deepened as they sat there, the city stretching out before them. For the first time in a long time, Mark didn't feel like he was merely surviving. He felt like he was truly living, connected to someone in a way that was real and meaningful. They weren't perfect, and they both had a long way to go, but they were taking it one step at a time. And that was enough. Later that week, as they prepared for another event, Eleanor turned to Mark with a smile that seemed to hold more meaning than usual. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice light but sincere. "For not giving up on me. For being patient, for being here." Mark smiled back, his heart swelling. "Thank you, too," he said. "For giving us a chance." They shared a quiet moment, standing together in the warmth of their shared understanding. As they entered the event later that night, arm in arm, Mark couldn't help but notice how different it all felt. The usual glitz and glamour of the high society world had always felt like a mask before, but now, with Eleanor by his side, it felt more like a world they were learning to navigate together. They were no longer playing a role, they were simply two people, standing side by side, facing whatever came next. And for the first time, Mark felt a sense of peace. They didn't have it all figured out, but they were no longer strangers. They were partners, and that, in itself, was a victory. As the evening wore on, they found themselves caught in quiet conversation, the noise of the gala swirling around them, but all they could focus on was the connection they had started to build. In that moment, Mark knew that this was just the beginning. They still had a long road ahead, but as long as they were together, he believed they could face anything. Months passed, and the dynamic between Mark and Eleanor continued to evolve. What started as a business arrangement, a way to secure financial stability, had slowly transformed into something neither of them had expected: a true partnership. They still faced challenges, but now they faced them together, no longer bound by the terms of a contract, but by their own willingness to grow. The mansion, once a place of cold luxury and solitude, had started to feel like home. There were still moments of doubt, still moments where the past lingered, but with each passing day, Mark and Eleanor learned to trust each other more. It was a quiet evening when Mark found himself once again sitting beside Eleanor in their living room. The house was peaceful, and the air between them was comfortable, something that had taken time to cultivate. They had been through so much, and now, sitting together like this, it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. Eleanor looked over at Mark, her eyes soft, a rare smile playing on her lips. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant, about the chance," she said quietly. "It's not about having all the answers or being perfect. It's about trying, and trusting that the rest will follow." Mark smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never imagined this would be his life, never imagined he would find love or even companionship in a marriage that had started as a simple contract. But here they were, and it felt real. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "And I'm glad we're doing this together." Eleanor squeezed his hand, and in that moment, there was no more pretending, no more uncertainty. They were no longer the two people who had entered this marriage out of necessity. They were partners, and they were ready to face whatever the future held. As they sat there, the soft glow of the fireplace casting warmth in the room, Mark realized how far they had come. The struggles they had faced were still fresh in his mind, the doubts, the distance, the fear of failure, but they had learned to lean on each other. What had started as a business transaction had become something much deeper. It was no longer about what they could gain from each other, it was about what they could give. And Mark knew, in that moment, that they had built something that was real. He had found a partner, someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. Later that evening, Eleanor stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. Mark followed her, standing beside her as they both took in the view. The city lights sparkled like stars, a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had changed. Eleanor turned to him, her expression serious yet full of warmth. "Mark," she began, "I know we've had our doubts, but I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. I'm here, for real." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. For so long, they had danced around the idea of love, of connection, never sure if they could truly let go of their pasts. But now, it was different. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm here too." They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the night, as if the weight of their journey had finally settled into something they could both understand. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was real. And for the first time, Mark felt like they had built something that was truly theirs, something worth holding on to. As the days continued to pass, Mark and Eleanor faced the future with new eyes. They didn't have all the answers, and they knew there would be more obstacles ahead, but together, they could handle anything. Their marriage, once based on a contract, had become a real partnership, built on trust, respect, and the willingness to give and receive. And as they walked through life together, side by side, Mark knew that the best mistake they ever made had turned into the best decision of their lives.